Okay, thank you. I want to thank the speakers for some inspiring ideas, actually, for moving forward as teachers in this area. So I think that there's two. I won't talk for very long because I really think we should open this conversation up to the room. But I do want to say a couple of things. First of all, that there are two key issues that are here. I think there's the issue of context, and that context is a happy story and a worrying story. It's a story of, on the one hand, of certain structural pressures. You know, the way that universities are working at the moment, the challenges of the broader anxieties about, or the broader decline of the humanities, the questions of whether people are whether faculty members are being replaced, questions of educational marketing, all of these sorts of questions are raised here. But there's also the happy story of a change in the perception of Ukraine, the happy story of sort of the normalization of Ukraine, of Ukraine being being introduced into a range of non-Ukrainian courses as a key example that will then, and students recognizing Ukraine because, for better or for worse, Ukraine is in the news. And so there's opportunity, I hear, in what people are saying, as well as anxiety. And I think the fundamental story that I'm hearing here is there are two things. First, it's the need for alliances, that we all need to work together. And the second is that we're really hearing the story of the challenge of Ukrainian, whether it's Ukrainian studies that we are pushing, or the study of Ukraine and Ukrainian topics. And there's no perfect answer, because in fact these are related. So what do I mean by all of this? What I mean is that when I talk about normalization, I talk about a different attitude towards Ukraine, that people know more about Ukraine, that the Anglo-Celtics like me are studying Ukraine and are recognizing it. That we have many Ukrainian people who were born in Ukraine who are now working in North America, either as students or who are visiting us regularly, and we are in constant interaction, for whom Ukraine is a given and not a question. So this changes the attitude towards the field as a whole. I think that coming from my perspective as a historian, my story is much more like Dominique's story in political science. It's the story of the flowering of Ukrainian studies, of Ukraine's having moved from being, when John Paul Himka was a student and he wanted to study Ukraine, he had to go and spend 9 months in Leningrad and have his one brief trip to Lviv, and because you could only go to Moscow or Leningrad, whereas I fell into Ukrainian studies because they closed the archive in Petersburg, and so I had been interested in Ukrainian studies, but that confirmed my interest because the archive in Kyiv was open, so off I went to work in Kyiv, and so we have this shift. Anyway, I think that so that in the history department here, for example, we have very active group of graduate students working in Ukrainian history. Students are drawn to Slavic history, and my colleague David Marples here and I, and our recently retired colleague John Paul Himka, and Volodymyr Kravchenko, we I think have generally worked on mainstreaming Ukraine, putting Ukraine into all of our courses. I, for example, when I teach second year Intro to Modern European History, oddly enough, my example for nation building is Ukraine, and then my example for the challenges at the end of the First World War is Ukraine, and then my example for displaced persons after the war is Ukraine, and so I have Ukraine works through as a theme in a general modern European history course. Coming out of the discussion we're hearing today, I do think that it is easier for fields like political science or history or anthropology to do this kind of mainstreaming at the undergraduate level, to pull research in, because we are teaching in English, and there's a sort of an expectation that the readings will be in English and so on. I'm very interested to hear about Taras's efforts to do similar things through literature, and so I want to recognize that point. So I had a few questions for the, I want to just finish on that theme by saying that means that those who are teaching language, in Ala's case, for example, face a different set of issues, because it's the language itself and not just it's not Ukraine per se or Ukrainian Canadian studies per se, but it's the actual tools that are needed to do this work in a serious kind of way. And I know that I, for example, start right away in first year. I ask students on the first day what foreign languages they read or speak. And I then say, that's because not everything important in the world is written in English. And that, my Russian or Ukrainian or, documents are not written in English, and I can't do my work without other languages. And so this is a fundamental thing that we need to sort of start from the ground up, of signaling the importance of language learning across the disciplines of Slavic studies. But I also recognize that part of the problem is that often the students don't come to that realization until they get later in the program in political science or anthropology or history, and we need those language courses to be there when the students finally clue in to the package and realize that this is a whole package. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I want to throw out that challenge of that question. So I had a few small questions for our speakers, but as I say, I'll then leave it to the audience. I'm interested in your comments about the Prairie Center, Bogdan, and you seeing that as a way of ensuring the future. But I'm curious about the personnel issues, because for us, I think at the U of A, part of the issue is that we have this wonderful 40-year-old institute, but the institute doesn't have any control over the decisions departments make about hiring. And so the question is how to sort of keep the ranks filled for the future. And so I'm just curious about how we keep those lines of communication open with departments and show the importance of preserving this Slavic studies, Ukrainian studies across the disciplines when we don't have when decisions are made at faculty and departmental levels instead of through the institutes. I was also interested in thinking about the question of what happens to language as we make the courses more available in the ways that Taras is talking about. I completely agree. I think that for example, that Russian literature is a gateway for us to suck people in, and then they find out how exciting the other Slavic languages and literatures are. How do we balance teaching in translation versus teaching how to work in the Slavic languages at an advanced level? And that applies not just to the literature courses, but to history and anthropology and politics, because to do those subjects well, you need to have high level of language skill, a sensitive level of language skill too. So that balance. Anyway, I think and then I want to finally say that I think that the emphasis that people have been making on understanding today's learners and finding ways to communicate with today's learners is a very, very important point, and one that we need to pursue. I wanted to ask you, Alla, you mentioned lack of confidence, and I'm curious about why you asked that, or why that was one of your criteria. And my second question is, does that not perhaps, your result perhaps reflect the fact that more of your students that are being asked are probably in lower level classes? Because there are more students enrolled in first and second year classes, I think. And I wonder whether it's simply a lack of confidence has to do with not yet knowing who we are and where we're going when we're in first and second year. So that's a small question. Thank you.
I'll ask the panel to respond to these questions. You have 3 minutes each.